Welcome to the advanced chapter of the RMS Consulting Group Windows PC Security Series. The advanced chapter is the final segment in our series. If you've made it this far and you've taken the steps covered in previous chapters, then you already have a solid and reliable computing platform with the knowledge in place to ensure that your information and computing experience is safe and reliable. In this chapter, we'll take a few additional steps to build on what we've already done, which will close the few remaining gaps towards the goal of total security and recoverability of your important electronic information. First, we'll talk about what it takes to further separate your personal data files and stored information from the Windows operating system files on your Drive C, which will bring with it improved simplicity to your daily user experience as well enhancing the reliability of your backup and recovery. Then we'll cover data encryption to make sure that your data is always protected no matter what situation you encounter. This is the advanced chapter, which means we will take on tasks and decisions that are more advanced than those in previous chapters. Not to worry though, because I'll step you through the pros and cons and make sure that you know what you're doing and why before making any changes to your system. Okay, let's forge ahead and get started with the advanced level concepts and security configurations. The first section I want to cover involves further separation of your personal data files from your core Windows operating system files. Remember from the moderate chapter just before this one, we talked about how mixing your personal data files with Windows system files can be problematic. Not only does this make locating your files more difficult, but it complicates the process of backing up. Then we covered how much more difficult and inefficient it was to perform Windows system images and recoveries if you had to include all of your files each time you saved an image. Finally, we talked about how confusing it is with that configuration to use the NTFS tools to secure your personal data if the files are not stored in a single organized location. So the first step in resolving this confusion was to create the C data directory structure and further to create subdirectories under C data where all of the users on your system could store their personal data. By creating this C data area and moving the user files there, you resolved a couple of functional problems, but there are still concerns that we need to address. A typical PC today may have lots of photos, videos, and other types of rich content files stored on their systems, which means that your data takes up lots of space and therefore makes the system image much larger than it needs to be. Also, if all of your stuff is on a single Drive C, and you find that you have to do a system image restore because of a problem, that image restore will copy over your current data that's also on Drive C as well. The best solution to resolve these inefficiencies and make things even simpler for you is to create another disk drive on your PC in addition to Drive Letter C where you'll keep all of your personal data files. In this scenario, you would have Drive C for Windows and programs only, and then using the Drive Letter D in this example, a drive letter where you store your personal data files. Now you know that anytime you need to save a file, retrieve a file, secure a file, backup a file, or restore a data file, that you'll be working off Drive D. And then anytime you need to work with Windows or program files, or perform a system image backup or restore, or do anything with those files that are part of your operating system, you'll know that you're working only with Drive C. Of course, you could assign any available drive letter for this new data drive, but for this exercise and the ones that follow, I'll just refer to your new data drive as Drive D. Here's a few obvious benefits to separating your data onto a different drive letter. With this type of configuration, no matter what happens to your Windows installation, whether it be a malware infection, a file corruption or deletion, or a problem with a new installation or update, you know that your data is unaffected and it's separate. If you have to take action to recover your Windows startup, roll back to a previous restore point, or bring back an entire system image from your backup disk, you know that only Windows would be affected and your data files would still be sitting there safely on Drive D. Once you get everything off of Drive C except for the Windows and program files, then your image backups will run much faster and will recover faster. If your personal data was stored on Drive C as it is probably today, and you had a serious problem where you had to use the system image recovery method to get your system back, you'd end up with a Windows system that was as old as your last image backup, and your data would also be as old as your last image backup. So after the image restore was completed and you got Windows back up and running, you'd then have to perform a complete personal data file restore using Windows Backup to bring all your personal data back to Drive C and up to date. Trust me that this can get more complicated and problematic than you really want it to be. If your data is on Drive D, you simply recover the system image to get Windows back up and running, and since your current data was already on drive D and hasn't been touched, you're back in business in minutes. If there's only one physical disk drive in your system and it fails, then that failure would take drive C and D with it. Of course, the same applies if the PC is stolen. Even so, your recovery process is still more organized and simplified when working with Windows and data files separately. And then there's always the option of adding a second physical hard drive to your system. Obviously, you'd gain redundancy and less chance of drive failure if you have two physical drives installed in your PC. In this scenario, you would use drive 1 or drive C for your Windows and program files, and drive 2 or drive D for all of your personal file storage. If you already have two physical disk drives installed in your PC, then you could simply move your C data directory over to that second drive. This brings up an obvious question. How would you determine the number of physical disk drives that are installed in your PC? Or what drive letters are assigned to which? You can find this information by using the Disk Manager tool from My Computer. Let's take a look. All right, I'm going to go over to the Start button. Then I'm going to go to My Computer. I'm going to right mouse click, and I'm going to say Manage. Then from the computer management screen, in the left window pane, I'm going to pick Disk Management. So if you look at the bottom window pane, I scroll down, I see that I have a total of two physical disk drives installed in this machine, disk 0 and CD-ROM 0. So disk 0 is my only hard disk drive. If you had additional physical disk drives installed in your machine, then you would see disk 1, disk 2, and other disks listed. All right, so I have one physical disk drive. You may have one or more. I'll go ahead and close that out. There are potential concerns that you may have with adding a second physical disk drive to your existing system. Your C drive is typically pretty large, and you probably have lots of free space available on it. By storing only your Windows system and program files there, you would probably be wasting a lot of disk space. Don't get me wrong, the ultimate solution is to have two physical disk drives for redundancy, reduced risk of failure, and even performance. Most Windows systems will perform a bit faster when the operating system files are on one disk drive and your data is on another. But it's not realistic for many users. So what I'm going to do now is discuss and review how to create a second drive or drive D on your existing single physical disk drive, which probably now is assigned entirely as drive C. This procedure involves using the Windows Disk Manager Shrink option. It gives you the ability to take your physical disk drive and split it into two or more logical drives. In this example, drive C and drive D. You'll hear the term physical and logical often when dealing with PC drives. Physical refers to the actual hard drive that you can hold in your hand, which is installed in your PC case. And logical drives refers to how that disk space is sliced up into smaller sections or drive letters. These slices or drive letters are known as partitions. So every physical drive has one or more partitions created on it, which are named with a drive letter designation. A drive with C and a drive D has two partitions on it. So our goal is to take advantage of the free unused space on your drive C to create a second partition, which will eventually become your new drive D. Of course, all of this assumes that you have plenty of free and available space on your existing drive C for these operations. First, you'll need to check how much space is in use and how much is available to make sure that you have what you need to get started. Although most typical installations of Windows 7s and their programs will use only about 30 gigabytes of drive space, I'm going to recommend that you configure your drive C to be at least 100 gigabytes in size so that you don't have to worry about space there in the future. Then the remaining disk space can be reassigned as your new drive D. Let's review how to calculate your particular space needs. Okay, so now I'm going to try to calculate how much space I've used already with my personal data files using My Computer. Opening drive C. And you remember that we created the data directory with our personal files located there, and then there's also some personal data files in the users directory. So I'm basically just going to click both of those and select both of them. Then I'm going to do right mouse click and click Properties. When I do, Windows comes up with my property screen for those two directories and then shows me the total amount of space in use. So I see here that we have about 313 megabytes in use with all of our personal user data. So the amount of space that we allocate for the new drive D should greatly exceed what your data is using today so that you have plenty of space to grow. If you find that when adding the 100 gigabytes needed for Windows and programs to the space needed for your data, that you're already coming close to filling up your drive C, then you may want to consider purchasing a second physical disk drive and get more space and go that route. Generally speaking, being short on disk space just isn't worth the hassle, and the disks are pretty affordable these days. I'll assume that you have the data space that you need for a 100 gigabytes Windows partition and enough space for a D partition to handle all of your data. I'll go ahead and close this out. Back to the desktop. Okay, so listen up. We're about to make structural changes to your hard drives at the operating system level, and we'll be touching most of your data. Before taking any such action, you must create a current backup of your data. That'll mean using both of the methods that we covered in the last chapter and doing a Windows system image and personal data backup before we move ahead. I'm going to hit pause now so that you have a moment to perform those backups, and then we'll get back to this section afterwards. See you when you complete your backups. Okay, so I know if you return to this section that you've done your system image and your data backups and you're ready to go. Remember, this change does present risk to your hard drive, so make sure those backups are done before we move forward. Okay, so let's continue by launching the disk management utility to resize our disk so we can eventually add a new drive D. All right, so I'm going to go to my computer, and then I'm going to right mouse click and manage again. Okay, so this brings up the computer management tool. So from here, I'm going to select disk management on the left window pane. Disk Manager is a very powerful tool for managing your disks and other storage devices. And as with many of these tools, it's important to take great care to only take the actions you're very familiar with. This tool can easily destroy your current disk configurations and your data that goes along with it if it's used improperly. Alright, so here at the top middle window pane, you'll see the disks on your system and some of their statistics. And below in the bottom window pane, you see a list of your physical and logical disks. I'm going to use a single mouse button click and select my disk 0 and drive C, which is my physical hard drive, and the drive C partition that's currently configured on it. Then I'm going to right mouse click and I'm going to select Shrink Volume. So now we see some statistics on what can be done using the Shrink Volume tool. At the top of the window, you see the drive letter that we're working on. Make sure that you're working with drive C. Then we see total size before shrink in megabytes, which is the total size of that current drive C. Then down below, we see size of available shrink space in megabytes. This is the maximum amount that can be shrunk or made available as free space using this tool. Then we see enter the amount of space to shrink in megabytes. This is where you will set the amount of space that you'll be allocating for this new drive D. Remember that I recommended at least 100 gigabytes for your existing Windows 7 drive C partition. That means that the total size number at the bottom needs to be at least 100 gigabytes, or in megabytes it should read something close to 100,000. Remember, this is in megabytes and your hard drive is in gigabytes. So you'd click the up or down arrow on the field above next to enter the amount of space to shrink in megabytes until the total below equaled 100 gigabytes. So looking at my example, you see that the numbers are a little off because my hard drive isn't as large as yours. This is a demonstration machine and my hard drive is quite small. It wouldn't be possible for me to leave 100 gigabytes for my operating system because the drive is that big. But your bottom line under total size after shrinking megabytes should be 100 gigabytes. Mine will be quite a bit smaller because my Windows installation is right out of the box. It's pretty vanilla and I have no Office or other applications installed. Very little data also on this drive. As I said, it's a demonstration machine. So you have all of your information on drive C, and we're going to need to make that 100 gigabytes before we click continue, all right? I'm going to do something quite different and just create my C and D drive accordingly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the down arrow because I want to leave 25 gigabytes for my drive C Windows partition. Right now it's using about 21, so I want to give it some free space to grow. Okay, so that's about 25 gigabytes. What this is telling me is that my total size of drive C after the shrink will be about 25 gigabytes. That the shrink space or the free space that I'm creating on that single physical disk drive that's installed will be about 13 gigabytes, right? So that 13 gigabyte space will become my new drive D. Okay, so these are my numbers, but let's focus on your numbers. Your bottom level number is going to be 100 gigabytes. And then the top level number that you just set with the arrow keys needs to be at least the amount of space that you calculated in the prior section for your data plus the growth space that you said you needed for your data. So if you need 100 gigabytes for your data, then that field needs to have 100 gigabytes or more in it. All right, so once the numbers are where you need them to be, you have 100 gigabyte where it needs to be and your data space is allocated properly, then we're ready to move ahead. First, a word of warning about moving ahead with this shrink action. This activity must not be interrupted because it makes changes to the very core data components on your hard drive. So take special care to allow it to run uninterrupted. You shouldn't have other programs running at the same time either. Close out whatever programs might be running on your PC at this time. And you need to make sure that if you do leave it unattended, no one else might interrupt this process. Basically, let's make sure that the cat doesn't step on your power strip and shut the PC off during this operation. So now that I've scared everyone about shrinking their drive, just know that this tool is very commonly used to shrink drive C to allow for other disk drives to be created, just like what we're doing now. Once you're comfortable about the sizing requirements and the settings, let's hit shrink to start the process. All right. So the tool is doing its shrink action in the background right now. All right, it's completed. So now we see that our physical disk 0 has drive C on it and then unallocated space available to it, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do a right mouse click on that unallocated space, and then we're going to say we want a new simple volume. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. We're at the Welcome to the New Simple Volume wizard. I'm going to go ahead and leave everything at the default. It's asking me how much I want this volume to be in terms of space. We want to use all of it. Now it's asking me what drive letter I want to assign, but you'll notice that it's only giving me the option of E. D doesn't exist in the list. And I wanted to leave it like this to show you this piece. Because D is already in use by my CD-ROM, it's not available on the list. So I'm going to go ahead for now, and I'm going to leave it E, and then we'll change it back in a minute, and I'll show you how to do that. Right? I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Now it's asking me what type of partition I want to format. As always, we want to select NTFS and not FAT or FAT32. And then you can call the volume whatever you want to call it. For this exercise, since it houses our data, I'll call it the data volume. It's okay to allow the check mark next to perform a quick format. That's fine. Now I'm going to click Next. It's asking me if I'm sure. Check all the settings. I am. Let's go ahead and click Finish. Now what it does is it's going to go out and format that partition with the settings that we requested. There it is. It's done. So now I have two logical drives on two partitions on my one physical disk 0. Right? So now I'm going to go down to my CD-ROM. I'm going to right mouse click on it. I'm going to say Change Drive Letter and Paths. Say Change. And I'm going to go ahead here and change my CD-ROM to drive F. CD-ROM drive letter doesn't really matter in most cases. Okay, I'm going to say, yep, let's do that. And it's done. So now I can come over to my new data drive. I can right mouse click on it. I can change the drive letter to drive D, which was my objective from the beginning. D should be available, and there it is. Say OK. Yes, I sure want to do that. And it's done. So now you have a new drive D on your system that can be dedicated just for your personal data files. Okay, so I'm going to close Computer Management and then go over to my computer and see what we can find. There it is. We have a drive D where we only had a drive C before. You can open it up. You see that it's empty. All right, so it's ready for our data files. So now we have the drive D on our system, which is dedicated for our personal data files. Just as we have in our previous chapter, we can move all of our C data files to this new D drive, of course making sure that everything's working before we go back and delete the originals. And don't forget, you'll have to configure your Outlook email client to point to this new D drive location. All right, so we're going to come over to drive C, and we're going to come over to the data directory. I'm going to go ahead and say copy. I'm going to back up, head out to drive D, right mouse click, and paste. Right? So now my data is all located on drive D, and all of my Windows files is on drive C. I'll delete the data directory after I confirm that everything's working. With this change, you need to alter your Windows backup scheduled jobs to include C users and D data. Remember that your C users directory might still contain some important user information created there by Windows or your programs, so you still need to include the C users directory in your backups. Also, it's important to remember that you'll have to go out to your D drive and then look at your individual user directories and reapply the NTFS security lockdown procedures that we did in previous chapters. Once you move data from one location to another, then you will lose the NTFS assignments for security that we've added. So we're going to go and add those securities again to these directories as we did before to lock them down. Once you have everything moved over to D drive and working properly, you can go back and delete the C data directory structure, and then you'll have a much cleaner drive C that's free of all of your personal files and documents, making it much easier to image and deal with as a block of Windows files. All right, so that's pretty much it. We've succeeded in creating a second drive on our computer for our data. I'm going to go ahead and close out my computer, and we'll move on. The last major component of the advanced chapter that I'm going to cover is data encryption. The term data encryption refers to a variety of technologies that use very complex methods to scramble the data stored on your hard disk in such a way that it's virtually impossible, if not literally impossible, for anyone to unscramble it. Although there are many tools out there that will do different forms of encryption, there are a few products out there that meet strict government and industry guidelines. We'll only be considering those such tools in this section. Okay, so the obvious question comes up. Why would anybody want to scramble the data saved on their personal computer hard drive? The simple answer is for the ultimate privacy and security. We've covered a wide variety of techniques in this series that as a whole will help you keep your information safe and secure. Even so, there are still a few gaps that exist in our current security model that data encryption resolves. Remember that at every step throughout the series, I'd remind you that even though we were securing your data under normal circumstances, your data was at complete risk if your hard drive was removed or your PC was stolen. That's because the Windows passwords and the NTFS security only works if you boot up your system normally and allow Windows to control things. Once a disk drive is removed and plugged into another PC, it simply becomes a new drive letter to that other PC, and the bad guy can browse your files at will. Data encryption scrambles your data using this very secret technology, which relies on special passwords or something called keys. So even if your drive is stolen, the bad guy would still need the keys and the passwords to decrypt your data, or it would just appear as useless scrambled junk to them. When you enter this very special password or key, that allows the encryption program to decrypt or turn your files back into usable state. So in short, by taking this last and final step to securing your personal data, you're creating a locked-down store on your PC hard drive containing your personal data files. That store cannot be broken without you. If you are using encryption and your PC was stolen, then you'd simply have to deal with the hassle of purchasing a new PC and then recovering your data using the system image and personal data file recoveries that we've talked about in previous chapters, and you're back up to speed. You no longer have to worry about what someone might be doing with your data. Another benefit of encryption is that you can lock down your PC at any time, so that when you're away from your PC, you're at work, on vacation, or wherever, anyone else who uses it would have zero chance of corrupting or viewing your files, because they wouldn't know the encryption password or key. I use encryption for every PC that I use, and I just couldn't sleep well at night without it. I set up simple icons on my desktop that lock down my encrypted data so that every time I walk away, I just click on the icon and my data is safe. I just click on another icon, enter a password, and unlock it when I want to continue working. Some versions of Windows 7 include a technology called BitLocker. BitLocker is the Windows built-in encryption tool. It allows you to encrypt any drive letter and then assign it a password and a key. Typically, I like to stick with all Windows integrated solutions when I recommend products for Windows PCs like yours. However, I believe that BitLocker is primarily for business use because it has some requirements and restrictions that get a bit difficult for most users to deal with. BitLocker is typically used to lock down entire drive letters when you may only need to lock down your personal data directory. It also has some hardware requirements that may not be supported by your PC. Also, BitLocker is only available in the Windows 7 Ultimate version. For these reasons, I'm not going to use BitLocker for this demonstration. If you are an advanced user or have a special need to encrypt your entire Drive C Windows area, then you may want to investigate BitLocker further. As I mentioned before, there are a number of products on the market that provide encryption tools for Windows PCs. If you already own a product, great. Then you should take the time to review its capabilities and consider encryption for your data, personal data file areas. If not, I'm going to recommend a product that's very highly rated in the industry and that meets the tough standards for security that are required by most government and corporate groups. It's a product called Truecrypt. Truecrypt can be downloaded for free and can easily be installed on your Windows 7 PC in just a couple of minutes. It's small in size and very powerful. It's also very highly recommended in the technology industry. Before downloading and installing Truecrypt, go ahead and do a bit of internet research on the product and you'll be comfortable with it before we continue with my recommendation. Okay, I strongly recommend, as always, that you install the latest version and that you use the Truecrypt official website for the download. Let's go ahead and run through the download and installation of Truecrypt now. Go ahead and load Internet Explorer. Then I'm going to go to www.truecrypt.org. Right? I'm going to click Downloads. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to select the Windows version and run the install. You notice that it's creating a restore point. We talked about how applications do that before they install themselves in case you have to roll back. All right, it's installed. I'll click Finish. Okay, so now that we have Truecrypt installed in our system, let's review our options for encrypting our data. This tool is very powerful and brings many options with it. You could encrypt your entire C drive, which would encrypt all of your Windows system's files. You can encrypt any other drive that's attached to your PC, such as a thumb drive or an external USB drive. Or you could simply create a block of space on your disk that's encrypted. Feel free to explore all the encryption options to determine which best suits your needs. However, to meet the security requirements that we've laid out for this series, all we need to do is create a block or a space on your PC drive where you can store your important and sensitive data and protect it with this encryption type. So in Truecrypt terminology, we'll be creating an encrypted Truecrypt volume on your drive D or your data drive. One strong advantage of using a third-party product like Truecrypt is that it isn't a Microsoft Windows product, so all the malware and the hacks out there designed to get around Windows won't apply to this product. Also, you'll be creating a new and very strong password that will be required to decrypt or access your data once you place it in this encrypted area. This password is independent of any Windows or administrator password that you have on your system. So by using this third-party product and leveraging encryption on your system, you create another completely new layer of security for your important data that stays secret no matter what a hacker knows about your Windows installation, your Windows passwords, or your Windows activity. So this is how it works. We'll create an encryption volume on your data drive that's large enough for you to store all of what you consider your critical files. These would be files that you think require this additional level of security. These should include email files, personal documents, spreadsheets, anything that has financial data, banking statements, and other similar types of files. Generally, there'd be no reason to include photos or videos or other such files in this encryption area unless you felt it was necessary to keep them locked away and for your eyes only. This volume will appear to be a single file on your hard drive and will give no indication that it's an encrypted volume. We'll assign it a file name that'll blend in with other files in your drive like, for example, myresume.doc. Once created, this, quote, myresume.doc file will show up on the computer like any other file does. You could move it, copy it, rename it, you can secure it with NTFS permissions, or do anything to it that you could do with any other file on your hard drive. When you open it using the Truecrypt tool, you'll be prompted for a password and a drive letter. Then Truecrypt will mount this encrypted volume of data as that drive letter that you selected. When you go to My Computer and open the new drive letter, you'll see all of your files stored there as you normally would. As soon as you dismount the volume using the same Truecrypt tool, or you log out of Windows, or shut down your PC, that volume becomes encrypted automatically and is safe against any intruder. As with many of the security enhancements we've covered, this may seem a bit complex at first, but it isn't at all. Once you create this volume one time and assign a password to it, you've done the work. Then you simply run Truecrypt when you log onto your PC and you need to access these sensitive files. You type in the password and all of your files work as they always did, just on a new drive letter that you've assigned. At the end of the upcoming demonstration, I'll show you how to create a couple of very simple files with icons that you can add to your Start menu or your desktop that will help you automate the login and logout process for opening and closing the encryption protected volume so that your files are just always one click away. Let's jump in and create an encrypted volume on your drive D for your data files and see what it looks like. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open the Truecrypt program. And this is the main Truecrypt tool menu and the status screen. I'm going to go ahead and click the Create Volume button to kick off the volume creating wizard. We're going to select the radio button next to Create an Encrypted File Container and then click Next. Next, we'll choose the volume type, which could be either standard or hidden. You could go ahead and read up on the virtues of creating a hidden volume if you like. Unless you really need one, I recommend that you go with the standard volume. So I'm going to go ahead and enable the radio button next to Standard Truecrypt Volume and hit Next. Now we'll select where we want this volume to be located and what we want to call it. Remember that this will appear to be a normal file on your hard drive, so let's locate it where it makes sense. For instance, if we want to start by creating an encrypted volume to contain all of user John's sensitive files, then we should probably place it in the ddata John directory. I'll click Select File and navigate to that location. Now it wants to know what we want to call the file. Again, just for this example, we'll call it myresume.doc. You can name it whatever you like, but just make sure that the file name does not indicate what it is or that it's an encrypted volume. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and click Save. Then Next. The next screen gives you the option of selecting what type of encryption technology to use. The AES default is perfect, so I'll keep that at the default and click Next. Now we need to choose how large this volume needs to be. You need to decide what size is appropriate for your situation. Calculate the size needed for all of your personal file directories that contain sensitive files, as we talked about before, using the My Computer Properties function. Then, depending on your situation, you may want to double it or add a substantial amount for growth. Once this volume is created, you can't change its size. If your data files eventually exceed the size of the volume that you select here today, then you'd have to create a new second volume that's larger and then move the files from one to the next. So for this screen, you may want to just do something simple, like double the current size of the data file space that's in use today on your PC. I'm going to be using the 2 GB number as my volume size. I'm going to go ahead and say 2, and then the radio button next to gigabytes, and click Next. Okay, so the next screen is where we'll create the new password for our encrypted volume. As we've covered many times in the past, standard strong password rules apply here. You can go ahead and read the message that Truecrypt shows you on this screen about password complexity. This password should be long and complex. In previous chapters, you created a tiered password policy for your Windows and email systems. This password should not be one of those passwords. Remember, you want to keep this independent of your Windows information in case Windows gets compromised. Then you're still safe. It should be the one single password that's used nowhere else if you want your data to be absolutely secure. Maybe a phrase or a sentence may work better rather than just a word. In the industry, you will often hear the term passphrase used instead of password when dealing with highly secure information. Okay, so a word of strong caution regarding the encrypted password that you're about to set for this volume. If you forget this password, you will not be able to access your data that you saved in this volume. Not ever. The whole point of file encryption is to absolutely secure data using this complex algorithm and technique that cannot be cracked. Many other programs that you use may have procedures to follow if you forget a password or you get locked out, not file encryption. Therefore, you must never forget this password. This is one that should be documented and placed in a safe, a safety deposit box, or other store that cannot be accessed. Of course, never share this with others or write it down and leave it unsecured. That would defeat the entire purpose of encrypting your data. So in short, take great care that you maintain this password properly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and type in a password now and move ahead. And confirm it. All right, I'm going to click Next. Okay, so now we're going to set up how we format this new volume. You should select NTFS if it's available from the drop-down menu. All right, I'm going to go ahead and select NTFS. Next, what Truecrypt is asking you to do is move the mouse around on the screen at random. These random mouse movements that I'm about to make will help Truecrypt create a completely unique encryption algorithm. Someone else would have to use the exact same mouse movements as I will to land on the exact same combination for encryption. I'll typically do this for at least 20 seconds and then click Format. So now I'm finished with that. I'm going to go ahead and click Format and begin the process. Okay, so now Truecrypt is creating a new volume on my drive D in my John directory, which is what we requested, 2 gigabytes inside, and it'll be encrypted with the password that I selected. All right, done. So now I'm going to go ahead and exit the wizard. I'm going to go ahead and exit the program. So now I'm going to run my computer and see what we ended up with. So looking over in Drive D, under the data directory, further under John, you see what looks like a file called myresume.doc. So this is the 2 gigabyte file that Truecrypt just created based on our settings. Although it looks like it might be a Microsoft Office document, it's actually just a block of encrypted data that can only be accessed by using Truecrypt and our secret password. Of course, you could have named it whatever you like, but always remember not to name it anything that would indicate that it's an encrypted or protected file. That's all part of the stealth for this encryption scheme. No one can tell from browsing your file system that you have an encrypted data file stored there. All right, so now let's see how we can use our newly created encrypted volume. I'm going to go ahead and drop down this window and run Truecrypt again. Now I'm going to come over to the Select File button, and then I'm going to navigate over to the G drive where the file resides, under John. There it is. Now I'll click Open. Then we have to choose a drive letter that will be used to access this encrypted volume. You should pick a letter and stick with it. Once you start working with these files using your applications, they'll start to look for the files in that drive in the future. Just like when we moved your data files from drive C to drive D, this will become the new default drive letter for the files that are located there. I'll go ahead and select drive S. Now I'll click Mount. Now it wants to know our password for our encrypted volume. I'll key it in now. I'll say OK. That was successful and went ahead and mounted that file as drive S on my system. Now I'll return to my computer to see what the result is of mounting this encrypted volume. Back to my computer, and you see now we have a local drive S. If I open it up, we'll see that it's empty. So what we need to do now is copy all of the sensitive files from D data that we thought were sensitive enough to warrant file encryption. In other words, John's personal data files will now be encrypted and safe at all times in this volume, and only will be accessible when mounted as drive S using the Truecrypt tool. As always, you want to make sure that everything's working well with your applications and your data in this new location before you delete any of the original data from D data. Alright, so let's navigate back over to my John directory where his data is. And let's look at some of his data, maybe his Quicken data. Maybe that's sensitive enough to encrypt. So I'm going to choose that. I'm going to do a copy. Then I'm going to point over here to my new encrypted drive S, and I'm going to do a paste. All right? So now that directory exists in that encrypted volume. All right? At some point in the future, I would go back out to Data John, and I would delete that Quicken data from that location. So now all of our Quicken data is secured in my encrypted volume. Okay, so theoretically we've moved all of the sensitive files that require encryption for John into this new location. So I'm going to go ahead and close the Truecrypt volume and see what we end up with. I'm going to go back to Truecrypt. I'm going to make sure that S is my selected volume. I'm going to say dismount. So now that I've dismounted, I can go back to my computer, and you'll see that no drive S shows up. It's been dismounted and it doesn't exist. All we have now in its place is the myresume.doc file, which you can't get into because it's now encrypted. So each time that you'd need to get to these select sensitive encrypted files, you'd have to use Truecrypt as your way to mount and access them. You would work with these files in this virtual S drive as you would with any other files in your system. As I mentioned before, this S drive and the files beneath it would abide by all Windows file system rules like renaming, copying, deleting, etc. Remember the benefits. Until you mount this drive with your password, your data is inaccessible and safe at all times on your PC, whether someone else is logged into Windows, even if they're administrator, or if the PC is accessed by some unauthorized user through the internet, or even if the PC is stolen. When you dismount the volume, when you log out of Windows, or if you shut down your PC, the data will automatically go back to its inaccessible encrypted state. So once you get in the habit of mounting only when you need to work with these particular files, and then dismounting when you finish your work, you're effectively turning your PC into a more generic system with little worry about what someone does with it, only exposing your critical data to any risks when the volume is mounted. With this type of encryption, and the other security steps that we've taken in prior chapters, there's really very little risk of data loss, no matter what situation comes about. Remember that your encryption volume password is your lifeline to this sensitive data. Without it, you have a useless file on your PC called myresume.doc. If you have other users on the PC who believe that their data is just as important and needs to be locked down with encryption, then you would just run through the same procedure that we just did, using the volume creation wizard to create a new volume that's encrypted for that user. So for instance, if I go back to data, then I go to Mary's directory, you could create a volume that's encrypted here for Mary the very same way that we did for John. Remember that each user with one of these encrypted volumes needs to assign their own unique drive letter so that more than one user could work on their file at the same time. Finally, there are backups to consider. Since these encryption volumes appear and work just like regular Windows files when they're dismounted, just make sure that your volumes are dismounted when you run the personal data file backups using the Windows Backup tool. Then Windows will make standard backup copies of these myresume.doc files, or whatever you chose to name them, as it does with any other file in your DData directory. Backing up this one single file effectively backs up your entire set of sensitive files that are hidden inside. Truecrypt does support command line operations, meaning that you can run most, if not all of its functions from the Windows command line. This means that you can create a simple file, and place an icon on your desktop to run it, which can mount or dismount your encrypted files with one click, instead of using the Truecrypt program that we have in this exercise. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now and create the files that will automate the process of opening and closing your volume to make it simpler, right? So I'm going to go down to the Start button. Then in the search field, I'm going to type Notepad. I'm going to expand that so we have the full window. And now in Notepad, I'm going to key in the following command. All right, so at the beginning, we're pointing to the C program files directory. That's where the Truecrypt program is located. Then we're going to say /volume, which says this is the volume that we're going to mount. In our case, it's ddatajohnmyresume.doc. Then we're going to say the drive letter that we're going to mount it on is drive letter S. And then quit says quit the program after it's mounted. The only thing that I'd add is that you have to make sure that the quotes are around that C program files command. It has to be in quotes. All right, so now I'm going to save this file. File, save as. I'm going to come down. File type has to be all files. That's very important. I'm going to be in the ddatajohn directory, of course. You can name this file whatever you want, but I'm going to say open.bat. What's important is that you end it with the .bat extension. It has to be a .bat file. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now I'm going to close Notepad. I'm going to reopen it again. Maximize it. And now we'll add the following command. Same beginning, C program files Truecrypt. Then we're going to say dismount and the drive letter S, right? So the first file that we just created and saved will automate the process of opening your volume and mounting it as drive S. This will close your drive S volume when you're done with it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and say file, save as. Again, type is all files. And let's call it close.bat. Again, .bat must be the extension. I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right, now close out Notepad, then use my computer and navigate to that and see what we got. I'm going to D, data, John, and you'll see that we have the two commands listed there. All right, so let's try open and see what we get. Double click on open. When I do, you see that it's asking me for the password. That's the Truecrypt password for this volume. I'll go ahead and enter it now. I'll say OK. All right, it's working in the background, and then you notice local disk S appears on my left window pane. So if I go to local disk S, now I see my Quicken data, which was John's encrypted Quicken data that we stored there. All right, so let's say I work on Quicken, I work on some of my other critical files. When I'm finished with it, I can go back to D, John. I can go ahead and click close. That'll run the command, and if you notice in the left window pane, it'll close drive S. Drive S is gone. So by creating these two files, I simplify the whole process of opening and closing, basically mounting or unmounting my encrypted file set. Simple as that. Any other user that has encrypted files on their system could do the same thing with batch files just like this in their own personal home directory. All right? Done. Now we've automated the process and made it simple, much easier to use. Okay, so that's pretty much it for encryption, right? We picked the tool, we installed it, we created and mounted the volume manually, then we copied data to it, and then we created shortcuts to automate getting in and getting out to make it simpler. Okay, so next is our chapter end clipboard review. Let's take a minute to review what we accomplished in this advanced chapter. All right, so although it was a short chapter in terms of time and steps, we did quite a few things. We reviewed the benefits of a second disk drive or drive letter. We reviewed logical versus physical drives. We covered the Disk Manager utility, what it does and how to use it. We calculated space requirements needed for our new data drive. I introduced you to the volume shrink command. We went ahead and ran shrink on drive C to free up space for our new D drive. Then we created a new partition in that freed up space. Then we formatted that partition with NTFS. We assigned it a drive letter D. Then we copied John's data from C data to D data. Then I introduced encryption. We reviewed the BitLocker product from Windows. We went ahead and installed the encryption tool from Truecrypt. We created a new encryption volume. Then we copied files from the D drive over to the encrypted volume. Then finally, we automated the volume activities with our batch files that we just created. This chapter, although quite short in terms of the number of changes we performed, provided very important safeguards to your Windows PC system. We closed up a few of the loose ends that were still out there from other chapters. It was important for us to take things one step at a time so I could demonstrate and explain what was going on and, more importantly, why. My goal was to explain what you need to look out for and then phase in solutions with each chapter building on what we learned in previous lessons. Please take the time to review these lessons and take the steps I recommend to make sure that everything we covered becomes part of your daily PC computing routine. Each chapter is indexed so you can jump right back in at any time. Now that we've been through the entire Windows 7 security series, I want to wrap things up with a review of our initial set of risks and the threats that went along with them, and then briefly talk about how the changes that we've made address each one of them. The first one we talked about way back in the PC Security 101 chapter was the risk of having your PC stolen. Notice that the likelihood and resolution doesn't change from before to after we've implemented our changes. Obviously, the security changes that we've applied couldn't prevent a thief from stealing your PC equipment, and you'd still have to replace and rebuild your system, but the impact is greatly reduced. This is because you now have a regularly scheduled data backup and Windows image process in place, as well as understanding how to recover your system. So rather than a complete reinstall of Windows and all of your programs, and then the time to recreate your important documents, you'd simply perform a system image restore for Windows and a data restore for your files. Leveraging the concepts that we've learned will have you back up and running in just a couple of hours rather than weeks, and without loss of your important data. The next threat involved unauthorized or unsupervised use of your PC and how that could impact your important information. Again with this one, there's a probability that eventually someone using your PC will cause a problem. However, because we locked down the user types to standard and not administrator, because we further locked down our important data using NTFS permissions, and because we now have copies of all of our important information close at hand for restore from backup if needed, the impact and resolution steps are far simpler. For those of you that chose to use encryption, we have that layer of protection as well. Next on our list is the risk of being damaged by a computer virus or other malware. You can see here that after our changes are made, all three categories are greatly improved. With the user behavior changes that we spoke about regarding internet and email use in the open forum that is the World Wide Web, along with strong antivirus and anti-spyware tools that are maintained and always kept up to date, you'll see that you are far less likely to be hit. Also, that changes needed to address some type of malware problem are far simpler, and include something like allowing your antivirus program to clean up a questionable file, or just by downloading the latest virus updates and doing a new scan. We also talked about unauthorized remote desktop access to your computer. Although this is fairly rare, you've taken steps to either remove remote desktop as an option from the services running on your PC, or at the very least added a list of authorized users to the remote desktop permissions list so that no one else can connect. If some unauthorized person were to remote desktop to your PC, the impact should be minimal because of the user account restrictions, NTFS security, and the encryption security that we applied to your important data. Next, I spoke about the concept of being phished out of personal information or access to your PC or other accounts. Although it's pretty certain that you would encounter some form of phishing attempt if you are an internet-connected PC user, and the impact to you would have been quite severe, after making our security changes, a serious phishing incident becomes very unlikely, and the impact is greatly reduced. This is accomplished by adhering to much more strict user behavior techniques while on the internet and when sending email, as well as the lockdown security that we applied using the NTFS permissions and file encryption. With these safeguards in place, the likelihood of a successful phishing expedition by the bad guys is greatly reduced. Then we spoke about having your firewall breached. In the series, we spoke at length about the importance of keeping your Windows and other hardware firewalls up and running at all times, and making sure that your Windows operating system stays up to date with all security updates. We reviewed how to browse your Windows firewall rules to make sure that only the minimum required applications had access to your system. Finally, with aggressive backups and recovery procedures in place, your ability to recover from an impact is greatly improved. Next, I talked about the risks associated with running a wireless network at your home or small business. I made sure to describe just how these systems worked and what your risks are, so you had a much better understanding of what you were getting into when you went wireless. We made several significant changes to your wireless router configurations to lock them down, exclude systems not specifically allowed by you, and further to encrypt your communications while on the wireless network. Then we made a matched set of changes to your laptops and other wireless devices to ensure they were also very secure. We covered the concepts of email, how open and public your messages really are, what kinds of risky behavior to avoid, and then some solid steps that you could take to secure your email password and user ID between your home PC and your internet service provider. You see that the risks before and after are similar. That's because besides securing your credentials using SSL encryption, there really is no way to protect the content of your emails and messages sent around the internet. This section was mostly to make you aware of how it all works and what to watch out for. Finally, in terms of our list of risks outlined at the start of our security system, I talked about backup and recovery. This is one of the most important components that must be in place to be able to ensure a safe and stable PC experience. You see from the before and after ratings that without a sound, reliable backup and recovery practice in place, you are certain to encounter loss, may encounter significant loss, and would need to rebuild your entire system from scratch in the event of a drive failure or theft. By ensuring that you back up your personal data files every couple of days, that you take Windows system images at least a couple of times or more per year, and that you maintain your system restore points for your operating system disks, you ensure minimal impact and only some recovery is needed no matter what event you encounter in the future. As for the list of risks and solutions, what it really comes down to is you. You are the only one that can make sure that these steps are taken and followed going forward. And you're the only one, of course, that can make sure that certain behaviors on the open internet are avoided. User behavior, along with a sound security policy for your PC, translates to peace of mind and confidence that your most important data and intellectual property that's stored on your hard drive or sent across the internet stays safe. Congratulations! You've completed the entire Windows 7 PC security system from the RMS Consulting Group. I've had a lot of fun creating it, and I hope you enjoyed the time that you spent viewing it, learning new security concepts, and tweaking your system. And if you have a great suggestion about the product, just let us know and maybe we'll include your suggestion in the next series update. Again, thanks so much for purchasing and taking part in our series, and in the future, look for additional titles from the RMS Consulting Group.